The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, let's get a first-hand account of what was found on this week's crop tour across the Midwest. We've been watching to see on social media a lot of the pictures and insights. Is the potential out there for record crops that have been much talked about here as of late? Also been watching the markets too, and the reaction in the grain markets to some of the news from the crop tour. Joining us now, he was on the western leg of the tour. Our good friend Ted Seifert with Zaner Ag Hedge joins us here today on the program. And Ted, by the way, happy belated birthday, sir. I know birthday a couple of days ago out on the tour.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. It's 9 years in a row I've spent my spent my birthday out in a cornfield in either Nebraska or Indiana. So yeah, it's kind of become a bit of a tradition at this point.
Yeah, kind of a good annual tradition for you. You know, It's like, hey, here's my birthday present. I'm going on crop tour.
Yeah, but I mean, it definitely reminds me that like I started doing this at 35 and now I'm 44. It's lots kind of changed in that 9 year span, I suppose. But you know, it is what it is, and it's fun and everybody knows it, right? So they kind of make a bit of a deal about it. So yeah, we had a fun day on Tuesday. It also just so happens that Tuesday is the I hesitate to say easiest day because Nebraska can be just difficult in logistic wise, but it's maybe the shortest day from a distance traveled wise. So
sure,
it means we can kind of we're a little more we're not dead tired by the time we get in. So yeah, it's nice. We had a good time on Tuesday.
Good deal. Well, hey, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. All right. Well, we could go state by state with this and do all that, but I think a good way for me to kind of just throw this to you, Ted, is firsthand account. What did you find? And then combined with what you've heard from the other side of the tour, is the record potential nationwide, I guess, if you add it all together, is the record crop potential truly out there here middle of August?
For me, Jesse, this is not a tour that we come back from where we have a definite answer to the question that you just asked, right?
Okay.
A lot of times we'll go on tour and come back and say, wow, the USDA is pretty much spot on, right? Within a couple bushels of corn and half a bushel on beans. Other times we'll come back and we'll say USDA is crazy. They're off by 4 bushels on corn and 2 bushels on beans. On this one, it's kind of difficult because what we saw in the West, I think, was rather disappointing for a lot of people. And when we look at the pro farmer numbers versus the historical average of pro farmer versus USDA, and we account for that and sort of translate into what the USDA equivalent number would be, you say it's going to be really hard to get to those USDA projections, specifically in Nebraska. And I haven't, at the time of this recording, I haven't seen the Minnesota numbers, but man, I got to say my trip through Minnesota, which pretty much I did the 30 route. So I was all through southern Minnesota on Highway 30. It was really disappointing, disappointing. I mean, I knew it was going to be bad, but I think it was quite a bit worse than I was expecting. So how does that rectify against numbers that were coming out of Ohio that I think are suggesting that the USDA is not only too low, but maybe 2 or 3 bushels an acre too low on corn? How does that rectify numbers in Indiana that suggest the USDA is either on point or maybe a little bit low? There's been a lot of controversy over the Illinois number coming out at 204, but I had said before the tour started that in order to hit the USDA's state yield for Illinois at 225, that Pro Farmer needed to find a 204. And I can go in a little further in depth on that if you want. There's a lot of people out there on social media and everything like that are saying 204, a 204 Pro Farmer number is too low to justify a USDA 225. I don't think it is. I think that's exactly the number we needed to see to get 225, specifically because, there's always 10 to 12, but Pro Farmer is always 10 to 12 bushel below USDA in Illinois. That's just the normal average that they have. But the part of the state that we don't get to, which is Southern Illinois and Southwestern Illinois, that sometimes has a bit of a drag on the state. Other times it helps boost the state. This is a year where I think Southern and Southwestern Illinois really, really boost the state, like exceptional. So I think a 204 Pro Farmer number puts us right on top of that, record yield that the USDA is projecting for Illinois. So really everything in the East and the pod count numbers in Illinois are just, wow, off the charts. So yeah, the East, if I were just looking at the East, I'd say the USDA is actually too low. If I look at the West, I say the USDA is too high. So now the task is over the next few days, Pro Farmer will do it, and then I'll do my own sort of thing using the same data and using all the same routes that I've been on for the last 9 years to kind of give out my next yield projection. But I haven't done all that yet, by the way, but my initial feelings on the whole thing is that I don't think we're going to see a deviation from either Pro Farmer or myself for that matter. I don't think we're going to see something that's too far off USDA. I don't get the feeling right now that either one of us are going to put out a number that's higher than the USDA for corn. But I don't think they're going to be significantly lower either. And then the other thing I'll say is, like, if you look at the numbers in Nebraska, which Nebraska came in well below what the normal deviation would be to hit the USDA number. Or to hit the record. I'm sorry, to hit the record. Was in 21. And the thing about that is that if you go back to 21 and you looked at soil moisture levels at the same time that we did the Pro Farmer crop tour, they were much less. So we were getting really dry at that point. And yeah, granted, a lot of that's irrigated. 60% of it, roughly 60% of it's irrigated. But the dry land in Nebraska, I think, has a lot more potential at this time than it did in 21. That matters for corn, for grain fill for corn, putting on weight, and that adds bushels. But more specifically, and more, I mean, really, that's a soybean thing. I think even those soybean pod counts were lower. I think you could have a better soybean crop because of the soil moisture that we saw in Nebraska. I feel that same way about Western Iowa. So, yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of number crunching that's going to happen, but the very unanimous feeling that we have right now is that, it's a mixed bag between the East being maybe better than expecting and the West being maybe worse than expected. And that mixed bag probably ends up not too far off of the current USDA numbers.
And I'll back you up on Southern Illinois, Southwest Illinois here as well. I just drove through there. I'm in Northern Iowa this week. I drove up from Nashville, and I got the windshield view of those crops at 70 miles an hour. They look pretty doggone good, Ted.
Oh, I mean, exceptional. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that, to your point, and that's, something that I think some folks, forget about, you do have to take into account with this tour, is that it doesn't cover all areas of all these states. And that's, that's very key to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't even touch Missouri. And when we talk about Southern and Southwestern Illinois being really, really good, well, look over at Missouri. Yeah. They had some getting the crop in. I think there are some places in Missouri that had similar issues to what we saw in Minnesota today, in northwestern Iowa yesterday. But the areas in Missouri that are good are really, really good. And I think that the Missouri number is going to pull things up as well. And again, like I said, we don't even get into Missouri. So, the tour covers roughly 70% of the growing area. And we break that down at county level. But that other 30%, I think a lot of that is actually pretty good and might help push towards that USDA, 183.1 and help push towards that soybean number. And also keep in mind, Jesse, soybean pod count is not a yield estimate. It's something that we use to talk about the potential of a soybean crop. But we don't we don't come out of these fields having a rough and dirty yield estimate like we do for corn. I think what I would say about soybeans is that the pod count is adequate given good moisture to hit record yields, to hit the USDA's target, and that moisture I think is there in most places. So I think the soybeans are set up. If you finish this soybean crop out the next 2 to 3 weeks with a little bit more heat, there's a lot of places that need a bit more heat for corn and beans, but a little bit more heat. And then if we follow that up with some decent rains into early September, ooh, I wonder if that soybean crop could just be a bit surprising. Like that's the one that really does have the potential, I think, to maybe beat the USDA's current estimate.
Yeah, and the old adage, right? Big crops can get bigger.
Yeah,
Ted, I think that's a good thing for us to remember here. This
well,
time of year.
adages work until they don't, Jesse. Right? And again, that's what we're wondering: is this the year that they don't? And I don't know. Look, I'll say it again. I still need to like really dig down county by county and crunch the numbers. Obviously, I've been crawling in and out of fields. I haven't. And I've been doing a lot of math, but that's just, coming up with these yield estimates and stuff like that. I haven't really gotten into the data enough to give you a more solid answer. But my feeling right now, I don't know. I'm just going to throw out like a 182.4. So maybe they're a half bushel off. That's my best thought at the moment. But that half bushel, it's not going to make a big enough impact on. Maybe it gives us something slightly below a 2 billion bushel carryover, but it's not something where we're going to see a dramatic decline in overall carryover or really a fundamental change in what we've got going on right now.
We are talking with Ted Seifert from Zaner Ag Hedge, getting his perspective of this past week's crop tour. I want to ask you a little bit supply and demand here before we wrap up, Ted, as we've gotten down to some price levels where we've stirred up some demand this week. The blue light special, so to speak, as China and others are in here buying U.S. grain, but especially on soybeans, we're behind on new crop sales here historically. So, I mean, you look at the expected big supply starting to get some demand here, but it feels to me like we got to find a lot more to start chewing through some of this supply. I mean, what do you think about that overall supply and demand picture right now?
Yeah, well, as far as soybeans are concerned, we talked about my birthday on Crop Tour being sort of a tradition. Well, another tradition is we have flash sales throughout the week during Crop Tour. I feel like on the week of Crop Tour, at least two, if not 3 or 4 of the days we get flash sales. It's almost expected. I expect it. So yes, it's great to see the sales. We're coming from behind, but they are very much expected. Like we expect to see sales at this time of year, and specifically for this week. The other thing about it is they're not big numbers. They're not 500,000 metric tons. They all add up. I think we're going to see some good weekly export sales numbers for the next few weeks, but we need them, right? And so, yeah, it's good to see. Is it fundamentally changing the balance sheet? No, not at this point. In fact, if anything, it's maybe just making us feel a little bit better about potentially getting to the USDA's exports numbers, which a couple of weeks ago, I even today, I still think are too high. Maybe asking me today versus 2 weeks ago, I'd say, well, they're not too much higher than they were a couple of weeks ago. And that's really it, right? For corn, the fundamental picture for corn, honestly, I don't feel like it's tremendously bearish. You look at what the USDA's done on balance sheets ever since Outlook, right? February, and then in every WASDE report that we've seen new crop estimates since then, their carryover has been coming down. And now we're sitting just very slightly above a 2 billion bushel carryover, and that's going to take a 183 national average yield to get to it. Honestly, I feel like that's kind of friendly. Now, it's not bullish necessarily because it's still a 2 billion bushel carryover, but the corn story just keeps getting incrementally less bearish. The only problem that we have with corn, Jesse, is that there's so much cash corn out there that needs to move in the next couple months because you know, guys were sitting on old crop corn feeling like, well, we're going to get our typical summer rally. We had three really nice pops for weather reasons last year. You know, I'm just going to wait. I'll set my orders, 40 cents higher, and I'll wait for the weather market to come and get me. And it never did that. So you got a lot of guys that are really undersold, and those cash sales are going to affect the market. They get laid off onto the futures market. And if you don't give the funds a good reason to cover their short position, they're just going to sit tight and let the natural seller, the American producer, come in and push the market lower into, I'm going to say, once we get about 30% through harvest, then we might see harvest lows. And I do think we could see a halfway decent recovery into the end of the calendar year or even into planting. In my mind, as I said, we need a 183 national average yield to get a 2 billion bushel carryover. That suggests that we need more corn acres. So I feel like corn, longer term, mid to long term, I'm pretty friendly on. We got to deal with the cash situation in the meantime. Beans, I keep coming back on beans to the global carryover. We went from roughly 98 million metric ton carryover 2 years ago to roughly 135 million metric ton. I mean, that's just an astronomical increase in just 2 years. There's got to be a bit of an adjustment in the soybean market. We don't need as many acres. I know everybody wants to talk about sustainable aviation. That's like the hot topic, and that's great. And that is something that is going to really be very beneficial for soybean demand and the crush industry over time. But how we get there, right? I mean, these major corporations, the AGPs, poets, ADMs of the world, they need incentive to build into infrastructure. They need to feel like they're going to get returns on their investment.
Yep.
And to do that, soybean prices have to be low and probably for an extended period of time. And that's the uncomfortable truth that I think we have to come around to in order to get excited about sustainable aviation. We can get excited about it, but we have to realize that it probably takes low prices to encourage that demand to come online. And then 2-3 years down the line, we can say, well, that was, look back at those years, that is what built us our domestic demand for soybeans. And that's a wonderful thing to have. It just might be an uncomfortable path to get there.
No, that's a very, very great point. And your point, too, about some of this cash situation in corn, Ted, I mean, just to wrap up here real quick, it feels to me like it's still kind of it's a standoff, and farmers, end users don't necessarily, no one wants to blink right now. And that's a big thing that's happening in this trade, too, at the moment, it feels like.
Yeah, and that Pro Farmer Crop Tour, right? I mean, that's sort of the last chance for the market to be like, oh, wow, these guys found something completely different than the USDA. Now we're going to get this big rally or whatever. But here we are, and it's, the end of the week, and we were down pretty sharply. And you're going to start getting that towel to get thrown in, right? And that Septis and even the Dees July spread is going to really get whacked. It's going to look and feel bad for a little bit. Unless you can get the funds to come in and buy their shorts back and take the other side of that trade, I just don't see that. I don't see the reason for that at the moment, Jesse. So, yeah, this could get worse before it gets better. But I think my message is that, you look a few months further out in time, and I do think the corn situation is getting better. It's not as bad as it was a month or 2 or 3 or 4 months ago, in my opinion. The soybean situation's maybe a bit of a different story, but I don't feel like corn's going to have a significant rally, maybe a 60-cent, post-harvest low rally, and soybeans just sit there. I think they'll want to participate in that to some extent. I do feel like the corn should be a winner based on the corn and bean ratio. I think that corn needs to really gain some ground there. But I don't think it's gloom and doom once we get past this. There's got to be a harvest low cash flush. I hope it doesn't get too nasty, because the lower we go, the higher we're going to have to bounce. But I am optimistic for how things will look from like October to maybe even early February.
Ted, good stuff. Appreciate you joining us. How can folks reach you there at Zaner AgHedge if they want to talk with you about their marketing?
Yeah, you can reach me directly at 312-277-0113. Aside from that, you can find us on the web at www.zaner.com. You can read a bit about us, read our bios. We also have an afternoon sort of markets update. This week I'm doing crop tour update. I'm about to do that next. So if you want to listen to more of my thoughts on crop tour, you can hear it there. And aside from that, I'm on the X, I guess. I'm at the Ted Spread.
Maybe give him a day or two to recuperate before you give him a phone call. Oh, man. Ted Seifert, Zaner Ag Hedge. Appreciate you, my friend. Thanks for being with us here on Market Talk, and have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. You too, Jesse, and say hi to your mom for me.
I definitely will. I will definitely do that. Let's go do it for Market Talk here today. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great rest of your day.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.